Though it took me many months, I eventually found my way to my mother's summer castle, the very castle in which you now stand. It was a place she used for refuge and said would one day be mine, though I doubt she anticipated the circumstances. I used the skills the merchant had taught me to make the surrounding town prosper. People flocked to it, and as the town grew, I began to require aid and advisors. I put out a call for any who would like a position helping to manage and steward what was now a small kingdom of my own. I took on many, but the most exciting and alluring of them was the magician. As an audition, he gave a performance before the entire court. He was a master of illusion and created animals and fantastical creatures made of light to swim, fly, and gallop about the great hall. He was dazzling, a first-rate talent, shining with charm and charisma. I loved him on sight. He joined my court and was beloved by all. He seemed to possess some kind of psychic ability, or perhaps it was simply heightened empathy and sensitivity that made him able to connect with almost anyone. My favorite thing about him, apart from his ease and humor, was the way he saw past all the finery, all the manners of court, into who I truly was. He saw not the prince on a throne, but the man who had been unknowingly bespelled, traveled with vagrant singers, danced elegantly in the finest halls, and been soaked to the skin in sea brine. He saw what I had always longed for someone to see. And so I asked him to spend more time together. He managed to fit me in among all his other appointments, so beloved was he, and I began to court him. I sent flowers to his room and brought him gifts. I invited him to extravagant banquets and took him for long walks in the palace gardens. And through it all, he seemed thoroughly and completely unimpressed. I confess his unaffected response made me try all the harder to win his heart. Perhaps that was my undoing. He came to my bed many times. The connection between us lit me ablaze, and the passion I felt was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I yearned for him, desired him so much that I surprised even myself. And then, one day, he vanished. He left a note telling me it was for my own good, and perhaps one day we could be friends again. He accused me of trying to buy his love, of making gross and obscenely grand gestures that he said were not love but manipulation. I wept alone for days, aghast, wondering how the love I felt, how my attempts at connection could be interpreted this way. Was I truly a monster? A man who used his position and power for sex, who believed he had good intentions but was truly a man that people feared and loathed. It was then that I felt something irrevocable occur. The doors of my heart began to close. I shut myself off from the world, from my subjects. I fell into despair. Perhaps, like the noble in the tower, I was better off alone, forever. As time went on, I found meaning in work and continued on despite my wounds and weariness. Years passed, and the kingdom continued to prosper. I healed some, though I never trusted quite the same way again. And then one day, as swiftly as he had vanished, the magician reappeared in court. He entered the great hall in precisely the same fashion, beaming sunshine and charisma. He put on his light show, and the figures that danced around the room were even more dazzling than they had been years ago. He approached and threw his arms around me. "I missed you so much, my prince. How have you been?" "Where did you go?" I asked. "To see the world. I've learned so much. I'm sorry for the way I left things. I thought it was for the best. Shall we walk?" We went to the gardens, and he told me of his adventures, of the magic he had learned, and the people he had met. He described the sights he'd seen and the food of far-off lands. He was full of joy and life. "Why did you return?" I asked. His face showed confusion. "I wanted to see you. You're such a wonderful person and a mature ruler. I was hoping to stay here a while and perhaps show you all I've learned. I think you'll like it. And, well, if you're not feeling well, I think what I have to show you will improve your mood somewhat." And so the cycle began again. He came into my bed, and we spent night after night exploring each other. He was right. I did find his new techniques satisfying. More meals discussing philosophy and the politics of faraway lands, more celebrations, more walks in the gardens. I looked at him one day and realized that once again, I was fully, deeply in love with him, despite the warning in my heart. He had changed and grown. We both had. Something deep within me knew this was special, and knew that he felt it too. And so one evening, over a mountainous pile of desserts he was gleefully devouring, I told him how I felt. I held back some, not wanting to scare him away, but I was honest and vulnerable, and asked him if he wanted to further develop the relationship. And to my great surprise, to the contradiction of all my expectations, he said, yes. He told me he reciprocated my feelings. My heart soared. Truthfully, I'd expected a non-answer, a dismissal, perhaps even a tirade about how manipulating I was. But no. Softly, with his brown doe eyes, he told me he felt the same way. The love we made that night made even his fireworks seem dim. And when I woke the next morning, he was gone. No note this time. His belongings had vanished. No trace of him remained. It was as if he had never been. The only proof I had of his existence was the jagged rent I felt at the very center of my heart. I didn't search for him. I simply accepted what had happened. I wept, and I knew that I was a fool. I suspect that one day he'll return, but he shall find me much changed and my court transformed. Still I grieve the loss of him, the death of a future I truly believed in. The colder I was, the less it hurt. Better to numb than to feel. But the greatest betrayal of all was yet to come.